for being here.
Oh,
Thank
yeah.
you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, have a great talk.
Okay. Well, she made me sound good. I'm gonna mess it up in the next 45 minutes, but she kind of covered a lot of the things I wanted to talk about, and so peace. No. Okay. But before I start, I spent the day before yesterday, or I think it was yesterday, at the University of Hawaii. And I got a chance to meet with some of the undergrads and most of the grads. And so this talk and a lot of the things that I'm talking about tonight is dedicated to them. They're all here. I want you guys to stand up and feel the love. Turn around, look at them. Okay. I'm going to start with, since she finished with art and practice, I'm going to start a little bit about art and practice. And when does activism really start? I actually think it starts before you go to art school. I actually think it starts when you are overlooked in the back of the classroom, and when you're overlooked and bullied in a community, and when you're overlooked sometimes in your own families. I think that's when true activism starts. Certainly the anger starts there. And so I really, when I was out of school and I had become kind of successful in the art world, I really wanted to do something that really talked about that. And so this is a topographical map of where art and practice is, but at the same time, it's actually where my mom had a hair salon. It's kind of where I grew up in the hair salon. The hair salon became art and practice. It went from my mom's hair salon to my studio to art and practice. Same neighborhood that that my mother always had businesses in. So it's like I grew up totally in the black community in a black woman's hair salon, and then when I was 11 years old, I kind of moved to Santa Monica. So I have kind of both. I kind of like I can, style black women's hair, and I can be like, "What's up, dude?" But it's interesting if you look at it topographically and you start to think about art and practice. The one thing, I'll go to the next slide. This is the neighborhood, but I'm going to go back. What we noticed, Eileen, Alan, and myself, is that in the neighborhood, there was a disproportionate number of foster youth. I would see them in the parks when I would go for walks, and what we realized is that although I wanted to have an arts organization, I also wanted to do something that addressed a critical need. And so I decided to make them neighbors. I decided that art and practice should be both helping a kind of critical need in the social service, and we thought about foster youth because that's what you saw, and exhibitions in art because I believe in contemporary ideas that generate objects or generate public programs. And I inserted that right in the local community. It's a lot to ask people to always leave their communities and come to us for art. It's a different thing to have those local nonprofits that are in the neighborhood they're on the way to go surfing, on the way to get some milk, on the way to the wig shop, on the way to the incense, on the way to the church, on the way to the barbecue spot. If we insert something inside, it makes it comfortable. It doesn't make it threatening. It makes it something that they can own. So when does that happen for a young person? I began to think about, I was one of those people that when I was in art school, not art school, when I was in school, elementary, middle school, and even high school, I fell through the cracks. I would do the little art classes, and I would get on the little yellow bus and go across town, and they'd point at art and say, "That's art," and I'd go, "Yeah, okay," because it wasn't in my local community. So this is actually across the street from art and practice, and this is what we all hope will become a cafe that's run by or very supported by the foster youth, that they can run it, that they can work there, so this is something that we're working on. Sometimes I work with people from my studio. We'll paper it, we'll do kind of installations on it, we'll show exhibitions that are in the space across the street. That's actually Alan standing there with the jeans on. I'll show you. That's us, yeah. So these are the founders of Art and Practice. And the thing that we all had in common is that we all came from, Alan comes from a Hispanic background. I come from, obviously, you all know that. And but Eileen Norton was very much, she was a school teacher. Alan was always an activist, and I was always an artist. And it was very clear that it was art plus. It was art plus. So it was art plus education, art plus activism. And I'm kind of standing in the middle because they're like the two pillars. Eileen was very much on education. Alan was very much on activism. And so that's how it became art and practice. And Alan, my partner, was the one who said, okay, all this art, 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 but what about the activism? What about the activism? Activism. This is the space of what it looks like today. It's really interesting is because this space, before it was the nonprofit, it was actually the beauty supply where I would go and get the supplies to style women's hair. So I would run across the street to get all of the supplies from this place, which was the beauty supply, and run back across the street in the 90s, and basically, who knew, right? And I remember being so tired, and I'd point, let me have that bag of hair, and let me have that color, and let me have that, and lean against the counter saying, oh girl, I'm so tired, I'm so tired. But I worked in the hair salon, undergrad, grad. I put myself through school, and I went back to working in the hair salon because I felt like once I became an artist, I had a profession, but I had to find a way to make money. So another thing is, we need to separate, and we need to give people that space. If a person says that they're an artist or an actor or whatever their creative purpose is, we don't have to monetize that, but you also have to find a way to pay your bills. So I separate them. I don't think that we should, well, you've never had an exhibition in the last 5 years, so therefore you're a waiter. I don't believe, I think that's disrespecting a person's creative impulse. If a person says they're an artist, but they have to pay their bills. Let them do them, you know. So these are some of the exhibitions. Alan, am I doing this right? Alan's over there nodding like. So the exhibition space, this is Ramses. It's called The Gathering. And this was a quilt show. And I'll just go through some of them. What's very important is the fact that we have museum collaborators, because it's in the local community. And to have a museum collaborator, it says a lot. It says that we hear you, that there's value, that we want to collaborate outside of museum culture. It's a difference for people to come to the Honolulu Museum, but it's different to have a collaborator outside in another part of town. It says something different. And so these partnerships are very important for us at A&P. It was Stephen Towns and Ramses. Ramses is a local quilter, and Stephen Towns was a quilter from Baltimore. And that's actually Ramses. Also, we have an education program where we work with local teachers, and we have contemporary art programs, and we have lesson plans. The thing that you don't ever have to do is dumb down what you do for any population. That's rude and that's disrespectful. You can't you don't know what people will understand. Just put it there and let them decide. And so we've had amazing success with these contemporary, feminist-driven, gender all over the place programs. The young kids just pick it up. This was, oh, help me with this. Who is this? Oh, this is Singa Naguti, yeah. Oh, let's go back. That was Marion Hassinger, okay. And here, Marion Hassinger very much has been having a resurgence of her work, been working for 20, 30 years. These are young people, probably have not been exposed to contemporary art, but it's in the local community. It is never too young, and people are never too early to have contemporary ideas inserted into their everyday life. That's what I believe. It's ideas of feminism, ideas of equality, diversity, equity, access and inclusion. That should be in all of our thinking. And it's wonderful to see that light go on. And also at the same time, we have public programs that are always free. most every Thursday we have a public program. So the artists give a lecture. Oh God, does anybody know this artist? Alan, do you know what this is? It's the guy who does the weaving. What's his name? Huh? Yeah. He does weaving, amazing weaving, by the way. But what's super important is to have these public programs that are free, that are pushing the ideas that we're talking about in a local community. That's the part that's really amazing. And it's always full, it's always diverse. This is Amy Sherrill. Amy Sherrill was the Michelle Obama. She did the portrait of Michelle Obama. And Aaron Cristoval. And we had a collaboration with the Hammer Museum. The show is up now. It's called Cosmic Constellations, excerpts from the Eileen Harris Norton collection. So I can talk a little, I'm not going to talk so much about Venice, of what I put inside of it's kind of squished up, but what I put inside of the exhibition. I'm going to talk about kind of Venice as a platform. When I was given the opportunity to represent myself, what do you do? What does that mean? And I thought, okay, the exhibition's going to be fully recognized, but how can I use this as a platform for something else? So what I did was, I started to work with the men and women's prison, 6-year collaboration where they actually take all the old billboards, all the plastic billboards, and they make bags, and they make, and they sell them. But there was little visibility around it. But when you think of Venice and the Venice Biennale, and when you think about Venice, Italy, you don't think about the women, and you don't think about prison. You don't think about incarceration. So I thought that I didn't want to just have I didn't want to just do art. I also wanted to do my kind of activism at the same time and put them at the same level. It's not like you have to give both of them some respect at the same time. Now, this guy's really interesting because I met him in prison. He was actually paroled at the same time as the Biennale, so I hired him. He worked in the Biennale for the whole time, and then after that moved to London and got a job. And this kind of network, I think it was very healthy for the Biennale people to come into my exhibition in the Giardini and actually see someone that I work with, and it's called Rio Terra. That's the name of the project. These through lines, these bridges that you can make, things that go together that shouldn't go together, but they go together because you decide they go together. And we're in our 5th year. We have a store in Venice. That's actually the store itself. These are some of the women. They also have a botanical garden in the women's prison, what used to be an old convent. And they have a laboratory. These are the women that we work in the laboratory, so we also sell those products in the store. So it's the bags and it's the pharmaceutical. But what's interesting is, now most of these women I've been working with for 5 years now, because I started the project 5 years ago when I was in the Venice Biennale. I've come to know these women. The women, I've never seen this. For the opening of the store 4 years ago, the prison allowed them to leave prison to come to their store opening because they felt it was that important to them. I was so shocked. I walked in, and these women were standing in their store with their products, and that was the first time many of them had seen their family without a grill in front of them in 4 or 5 years. So it's amazing what things can happen when you get out of the way and you just do the things that you really feel led to do. It's not like there was a platform for it when I went to Venice. I was the Venice Biennale representing the United States, but I carved it out. I kind of demanded and bent the rules and changed everything. There was one woman that worked, 1, 2, 3, 4. The 4th woman from the right, She didn't want her parents, she did not want, she kept telling her daughters that she was not in prison. And she kept telling her daughters, oh, I'm away and I'm away. And then she finally told me, she says, you know, Mark, because of this program and because of this project and working with you, I told my family. And they were like, Mom, you're working with this artist and he's doing that. And so art bridged many different relationships that you never see. So the woman on the left now is out of prison and working in the store. And so you use the store as a segue. When they leave prison, they can work in the store, they can learn, they can have ownership of something. And this is amazing also. At the same time, the vegetables that they grow in the garden, the superintendent allows them to sell the produce in front of the prison every Saturday. That is so different than the American penal system. I mean, what would it be if we would give our people who are incarcerated more humanity? I mean, it's really incredible. And it's in the Giardini, and not in the Giardini, Giudecca. It's on the small island. Everyone from Giudecca comes and buys. Everyone from Giudecca comes and buys. It's really incredible. So I'm going to skip into talking about Shanghai because the earlier, she talked about it. So this is the Long Museum, and it's in Shanghai. And I did a show there 8 months ago. And it was really interesting because the vaulting, the scale of the museum was so huge. This is a project, a sculpture that I did for Prospect One. Right after Hurricane Katrina, I was invited to the Biennale and I worked with a local nonprofit. And at the same time, I built this sculpture that kind of critiqued and questioned, because it was such an emotional time when I was there. It was 2 or 3 minutes after the flood. And you're asking yourself, what can I do? I mean, do they need art now? I don't even know if I want to do art. But through a system of kind of conversations and working with everybody, we kind of came up with something that really felt to carry the tone. This is called, but this place was an old coal factory. And like the Long Museum is huge. So that, let me see, how big is it? Well, you see a person, right? It's big, real big. And it's built out of plywood barricades, and all the paper's been kind of taken down from them. And now in this rendition, the top of it is built out of plywood, but actually in New Orleans, I just stacked shipping containers, because in New Orleans, after the flood, many of the damage was actually done by the shipping containers breaking loose from the yards. So again, using the material and the memory of material and the political memory of the material kind of does a lot of the work for you, or it can do a lot of the work for you. So I kind of started off this show because it's really interesting doing a show in China, because you have to submit everything through, what's the word? Yeah, you do. You have to submit everything and tell them exactly what you're doing and all the materials. So these are really kind of big files. So. Now the prototype of what I used was a battleship. Although it looks like Noah's Ark in a way, and I actually used the battleship. It's a little meaner. But this idea of grids and this idea of plywood barricades, and after she spoke a little bit about 1992 riot. After 1992, basically, is when my material palette appeared in the urban landscape, because there were so many burned out lots that people who owned them had to put up cyclone fencing. And if they didn't put up cyclone fencing, they put up plywood barricades. And then if it was plywood, people would paper it. So on the cyclone fencing, they would put up the receive cell phone calls, or we know you're losing your house, we'll sell it to you cheap. So all this palimpsest of urgency and all this palimpsest started in 1992. I graduated in 1997. I was super broke. So that all kind of works. walking around broke, figuring out what to, there was just so, it was a density there already. And these are images right after Hurricane Katrina. This was really interesting because they would go house to house and they would write how many dead, how many, who the owner was, contact, so the billboards, the surfaces, the skin of houses became actually information. They would leave notes for loved ones, tell my aunt that I'm here. So this idea of water and destruction, and so the Long Museum actually is on kind of a, it's on the bund, and it's a port. So, and this was an old coal factory, and these are actually buoys. You know the funny thing about these buoys? These buoys were supposed to go to a show in Sharjah about 2 years ago. Put them, they went from the studio and got lost on a boat that went to China. So funny. They never got there. So I ended up having to go to Sharjah and make a whole new set of works, which worked out. But it's funny, these finally did end up in China. Buoys. I'm fascinated by buoys. You know I'm fascinated by buoys? Because I can't believe that we haven't figured out a better way to protect a boat. It's just a big old piece of plastic between you and like destruction. Like, have you ever seen boats come in and it's just a buoy? And you're like, God, you haven't figured out a better way to, boats are expensive. Like, but, so, and also this idea of working circular, always thinking about being an artist and working in two-dimensional and flat, and this working in this kind of circular. I'm always thinking of different surfaces. So although these were paintings, they were actually on buoys themselves. I worked on top of these, papered them, and they started deflating. And that's a beautiful one. Yeah, in the space, it has this kind of, and what I liked, there was a lot of vistas that you could look through and you could see, because you know how big it would have to be for that first room with the art to be in it to still have space to walk around. This is a big coal factory. Another thing that I did was, I call it a waterfall. So I would paint on the walls and these strips, and then I would pull them off and cut, and I would make these kind of sculptural paintings. It's a painting, but it's also a sculpture. Finding different ways, and then I would kind of put them together on site. So the back is a painting on the wall, and this is something that I did off of the wall, and it is, but then when it's up close, it just feels like an abstract painting. So what constitutes a painting? I'm always kind of questioning that and thinking about that and the history of that. And when I was thinking about being an abstract painter and kind of having material that pointed to the world, but I didn't want to be a spokesman for the world. I wanted to pull it back into my studio and grapple with it. I think if you pull something from the world and it has an element of political urgency, and pulling it back into your studio, I think that that's where the hope comes from. I think that even though I acknowledge that there are, and I never steer my gaze away from things that politically are challenging, but I also have hope. So I think when I bring things that are heavily loaded back into my studio and I grapple with them, there is some beauty. It may be a little rough around the edges, but there still has to be beauty, or there still has to be hope, or there still has to be. So I think that that's where my studio comes in. I made a series of 4 paintings from a song in 1960, Martha Reeves and the Vandellas Dancing in the Streets. The interesting thing about that song was that it was the same summer as 1965 riots. And there's one narrative that says it was just a happy summer song that was kind of co-opted by this kind of political unrest. There's another song that says, no, 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 it was absolutely coded. Every city that was burning was something that was in the lyrics. I prefer the second version than the other one, but I like things that exist in between. So, I mean, yeah, I do it. Yeah, I didn't know how that got by the censors, to be honest with you. So these surfaces felt like oil slicks, and embedded inside, deep inside of them was the text, kind of buried. And on that one you could see, on the left you could see it a little bit more. And also, what was really interesting is I got in my car and we projected outside we opened the side of the van and we projected onto the sides of building in Watts the Martha Reeves and the Vandellas video, and we've kind of photographed it. So it had this palimpsest of like history and film, and we made like a small film of it. And so what you can see is, you can see Martha Reeves and the Vandellas from 1965 at a concert in, I want to say, England, projected onto modern day buildings in Watts that were reanimated after 1965. So it's like the ghost of a ghost. So it's really interesting. It looks both vintage and very contemporary at the same time. It's kind of disorienting. You kind of know it's kind of a vintage image, and they were huge, because the projector would project them like huge, and it's kind of funny doing it, because it was really interesting. We turned down one street and I ran right into a policeman, and I'm like hanging out of the van with this projector, projecting it, and he stopped and he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Art." And he's just like, "Okay." And because it was so outside of normally what he would understand, he just drove on. And it was funny because as he was driving, he was like looking. And I'm like hanging out, you know. And I was telling the grad students that oftentimes when I'm getting materials from the world, or from how do you take down plywood and billboard information, you know, sometimes I wear a vest and I put out cones and I look really annoyed like I'm a city worker. I can't do it as much now because they're like, no, I've seen you, 60 Minutes. But so how to disappear. If you notice on a lot of the, or if you've seen pictures of me, I wear white. People think that's like a spiritual thing. It's actually not. What it is, if you go to Home Depot, the only clothes that they have for sale are painter's clothes. And so I started just buying the painter's clothes, and then I realized that everyone, when I would go to Home Depot, just thought I was a painter. I couldn't figure out for years and years and years, people would say, "Well, do you have a card?" And I'd say, "No, I don't have a card." And I think I asked Alan, "Why do you keep saying, do I have a card?" He said, "Because they think you're a house painter." Because I would say, they'd say, oh, what do you do? And I said, "I'm a painter." And they would say, "Well, do you have a card?" And I was like, "No." Privileging art, right? So, so that was also part of it. And so the show ended with these, the globes. So I did a series of globes. He would watch the world burn if he could be the king of the ashes. It was a quote from Game of Thrones, but I think it was apropos in some ways. It's all the earth, but of different sizes, to really talk about the inequities, that it is not even, power is not even. So I made big globes and little globes, but they were all little earths, big earth, really to talk about inequity, and to talk about the fact that the water runs black and the earth is scorched. So really to kind of front forward a little bit of the conversation people have been having, if they have any type of consciousness, to think about the earth that we all live on. We're not going anywhere. So this was a big kind of installation at the end of a hallway that kind of floated. It was strong, actually.
What are they made out of?
They're made out of styrofoam and paper. That's all I use is paper. Yeah, and I had to do them. Yeah, I've never seen that before, but I had to do them one at a time, and then they were crated and sent, and then on site we kind of had to fix them up. I want to say, oh yeah, there it is. So that was, so people who can speak Chinese, it says, what the shirt says is, yes, I'm 2 meters and 7. Or, am I saying this correct? It's something like, yes, I'm 2 meters and 7, or I am 2 meters and 7, because people always want to know how tall I am. No matter which country I go in, they all want to know. So I thought it'd be really cool to make a shirt that says, you know, I am 2 meters and 7. But what I did was I made them for the whole crew. The whole crew of the Long Museum in Shanghai, everyone. Now the two on the right are my assistants, and the guy on the left is the manager or the one who helped me put the show. But it was like 50 people who were walking around with these t-shirts. It was amazing. It really was, because they came in small, medium, and extra large. So whatever, and clearly everybody wasn't 2 meters and 7. It was a fun way of taking something and kind of talking about it in a way and playing with it instead of every single time. That's a painting called Los Angeles. A lot of times I'll take topographical maps, and in this one I took a topographical map and then I erased kind of the areas of unrest, things that happened. Parts of South Central, parts of, there were a couple, one in 1992 and one in 65. So I went back and kind of remapped those and made them big ink wells a little bit. I think maps are always interesting from a top down. From a micro, it's about people. From a macro, it's about statistics. And that in between is kind of where we never really look. I always say that I'm interested in either data or the close stories. But they also look like land masses. I also want to talk about Pickett's charge. Actually, every show that I've talked about now really has to do with the architecture. The Hirshhorn is a circular thing, and I thought, circular, can't get around it. Started doing research, got interested in dioramas, cycloramas. Oh, cycloramas. What's the most interesting one? Pickett's chart. What's that? You know, in Gettysburg, the North and the South, the Civil War. Black man, Civil War. Good thing, you know, Pickett. That was on the Confederate side. Why is it called Pickett? Seems like it should have been called whatever the other side's general was. So I just started doing research. And what I did was I realized that there actually was a cyclorama of Pickett's charge in Gettysburg. So what I did was I took all of the imagery from that cyclorama and sent it to a billboard company and had it digitized to kind of make it feel more like propaganda. That's my studio. Then I basically built my own version of Pickett's charge in my own studio. With you know, being really complicated. I remember looking for like the black people, like where are the black soldiers? And and doing the research, although they were freed at the time, they could not be in the war. They had to either work for a doctor or a medic, but it hadn't, so it was really interesting, me being an African American, looking for people in this Filipido's depiction of Pickett's charge as I was kind of remapping it in my own studio. And if you've ever been to Gettysburg, and if you've ever been to the cyclorama, it's this whole thing. I mean, it's the lighting and the Old South and Old Glory, and the lights go up, and it's kind of, yeah. It's romantic, but I don't know if I'm uncomfortable romanticizing the fact that they lost. That's a good thing, right? I mean, so you have these kind of ambivalent things going on, and this is my version of it. I use everything: rope, twine, caulking, billboard. These are 12 feet by 50 feet, 8 of them. Look, I look like a tree, don't I? Standing there like a... I think that's it. Okay. Thank you.